Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today we're coming at you, as always, with a brand new episode for two new release reviews. We're going to be talking about the album follow-up to his critically acclaimed project, DiCaprio 2, the sequel to Leonardo DiCaprio, everyone's favorite star of Titanic. J.I.D. We're talking about the Forever Story. And we're also talking about the end of the saga, Muse's The Will of the People, The Will of the People.
Today is truly the day where we take the power back, and we are joined for this discussion by a friend of the podcast, infrequent guest, Jen. Of course, thank you, Jen, for joining us today, especially given the tragic loss of August and Morgan on this untimely occasion.
We lost a Kentuckian, so we found another one and put them on the show.
They will be rejoining us just as soon as they are alive again. But, you know, this past week has been a good one for the podcast. Last week, we reviewed the new albums from the Mountain Goats and Panic at the Disco. We had some great conversations about those two bands. And I imagine there might be a somewhat similar tone to the dynamic of that episode as in terms of the two reviews, as there will be today, but we'll see how that goes. We also did a fantastic record club on both of the main studio albums of Joy Division as well, that we highly recommend checking out. That was a really good one. Plus, Jake and I also did a full discography breakdown of the legendary Icelandic post-rock band Sigur Rós. That went up on Friday. That's a great video that we put our whole entire heart and soul into. Joy Division reference there, just calling it back. So that's worth checking out. Really, really proud of that video and proud of how it's come out. Our first full discog breakdown in, I think, about 3 months. So long overdue, and I think a really great video.
And with a band who deserved it more than such, I think.
Absolutely. So today, yes, we're going to talk about some new records, and we're going to see how that goes. But first of all, before we get into it, let's do, as we typically do, what we have been listening to for the past 7 days. Jake, what have you been listening to?
I did listen to some new releases this week, one of which being an album that August and I briefly discussed the possibility of talking in like a mini segment or something if it was particularly striking, that being the new album Drift from dark folk outfit Heilung. This is I want to say that there's some flavor of a European band who put out their previous album, Futha. Is an album that August and I love a lot. It didn't get a whole lot of attention when it came out, but it is a very, very traditional dark folk sort of it's something that has none of the bite of black metal but has the aesthetics of black metal. It's a very difficult project to recommend, but if you they also revolve around a lot of traditional instrumentation. This is a band that make their own instruments out of human bones. It's raw as fuck. It's cool as hell, and it has a lot of really there's a lot of throat singing and shit on it. There's just tons of weird shit, and it really comes together on that previous project. And I must confess, it doesn't really come together as well as it did before on this new album. For a while, I was a little bit confused as to why this seems to be getting comparatively mixed reception, because the people who did hear Futha thought that it was pretty good. It did very well, critically speaking. This, on the other hand, for the first 3 or so tracks, it really hits that kind of stride that it had before. It has a depth and an atmosphere that I feel like the production really adds to on this go around, which is nice. I'm glad that they're developing their sound a little bit. Unfortunately, after that, the album structurally just kind of dives off of a cliff a little bit. There's just a couple skits and spoken word segments, and then there's this one spoken word segment that lasts 5 minutes, and it's just an amalgamate of sound effects. And it's a battle happens and you just hear a bunch of sound effects, and then you hear a Wilhelm scream. And let me tell you, that shit really takes it out of this supposedly like really immersive atmospheric experience. It's like you're just listening to this album that sounds like it sounds like the soundtrack to like The Northman. And then it sounds like a fight scene is happening, but you can't see what's happening because it's music and not a film. And then it just sort of meanders a whole lot, which is a shame just because this is a really unique band and they have made really good stuff in the past. So this is my opportunity to recommend you check out their previous effort. There is nothing quite like it. Even like the dark folk music that I have heard in my time is not as full sounding. It's not as like operatic. It's not as like big in production. So this is a really unique release that I think a lot of people would dig. It's just a shame that the band's catalog thus far seems to be a bit insubstantial. My particular comfort music of choice this week has been a bit of a strange thing to say on this podcast, the music of Smashing Pumpkins, which is funny because I tweeted about this and I was just like, one of my most inexplicable loves is the early discography of Smashing Pumpkins because, you know, Billy Corgan, as we have mentioned, immensely unlikable presence, depending on what mood I'm in, and insufferably annoying vocal presence as well. And also all their albums, even the great ones, are just way too goddamn long, and I don't care. I just don't. You go back and you listen to something like Melancholy and none of that shit matters. I actually like did this all in one evening where I was just like, I've never really fully decided what my favorite Smashing Pumpkins album is, like what it is, just because those top tier records, the run of Gish through Adore is so good, and I've just never definitively come down on it. It's like in my earliest days, I would have said Siamese Dream. And then as I went on, I would have said Melancholy. And then maybe more recently, my affection for something like Adore has grown exponentially. So I'm like, I'm going to listen to all of these albums in one sitting, one shift, and I'm going to decide which of these is my favorite. And most boringly, it's Melancholy. I can't front, I can't pretend that I'm the cool kid. But it's just like Melancholy is the essential desert island album. If you said, Jake, you can only have 5 albums with you for a year on a desert island, I guarantee you one of them is going to be Melancholy. And that's just because this is an album that literally has everything. And it's just like, yeah, it's a fucking double album that's like a bajillion hours long. Of course it does. But that's not just it. It's just that this is the most, like, genre-wise, it's the most versatile of the Smashing Pumpkins catalog. If you want the dreamier kind of sound of Siamese Dream, you'll find it here. If you want the sort of slower, kind of edgier, gothier stuff, it doesn't quite fully commit as much as Adore, but there is some stuff on the second disc that I think will tide you over a little bit. And it's also got the heavier, rockier shit that something like Gish has. And it's also just, I mean, like, come on, man. Porcelain of the Vast Oceans is on here. Fucking 1979 is on here. Fucking the title track. Fucking, like, I love so many of these songs. 33. Ryley and I, as we have both mentioned in the past on this podcast, our affection for the song Zero, which is maybe Billy Corgan at his most Billy Corgan.
My reflection, dirty mirror. Like, the thing about Melancholy is that the most cringeworthy moments are as essential as the moments that make your heart melt like a pat of butter on a stove. Like, it is,
you see the vision.
Every moment of that record, like even the moments that don't work. Like, it is just an album that exists in this unwieldy form and makes it work through sheer force of will in combination with ridiculously consistently compelling songwriting. Even the goofiest moments of that record, like Zero and like XYU and stuff, I absolutely adore those moments because they are, and it actually kind of taps into a sort of feeling and a kind of like primal goofiness that is not unrelated to one of the discussions that I'll be having a bit later on in this episode, but is like even more like shameless in its total embrace of just the absolute cheese that exists within Billy Corgan's brain. And like XYU works because it comes after Stumbling. Like the thing of this record is the dynamics.
My favorite song on the album
Oh,
is
really?
Stumbling.
Wow.
Yeah, I
Yeah, so
love that
the
song so
album
much.
works because of dynamics. The album works because you're thrust from one extreme to the other at any given moment. The album works because you have juxtapositions like that, like 1979 into Tales of a Scorched Earth, like Bodies into 33, like Bullet with Butterfly Wings into To Forgive. Like you get all of these moments of like sharp juxtaposition, and all the time the record is unified by some of the best musical compositions, riffs, general stylings that you could imagine. I mean, like even just the last 5 songs on the album are like a perfect EP. It's some of the most beautiful music you've ever heard in your life. You can everything, the whole history of rock music exists within Melancholy, and it's a weirdly ridiculous thing to say, but it's true. And not all of it works for me. I don't have the ineffable, like flawless connection to it that Jake does, but it has been a record that I have owned since I was a teenager and spun to death. And it's ridiculously enchanting.
I remember when we did our series review and you talked about the music of early Smashing Pumpkins, and you said that it was like the sound of like youthful like romance, and like that has always stuck with me as being like really true. I mean, there are songs on here like Cupid DeLocke, especially a song I fucking love, that just really capture of like that's what the early Smashing Pumpkins is to me, is that it's a portrait of youth. And Melancholy is probably my favorite because I think it's the most holistic portrait of youth. It captures everything about the experience and frustrations and the romance of being a young person. And these days I find myself reminiscing to that stage of my life and then looking back on it more fondly than I did when I was experiencing it. So an album like Melancholy just fucking hits. I also, because of our Joy Division video and because we mentioned this at the very end, we talked about one of our favorite bands, a band we have covered in the past. We talked about the Twilight Sad. But I took this opportunity to revisit what was my least favorite Twilight Sad album, which is No One Can Ever Know, which is what I would have said is the closest comparison to Joy Division. And the one I said that if you like those albums, you should start with the Twilight Sad, probably with that record. And honestly, this has actually really grown on me. Not to say that I disliked it before. It was an excellent album. But a lot of the problems that I had with it were problems that I had with Joy Division when I was younger. And now that I'm a little bit older and now that I've grown with a taste for that music, I can certainly say that I like this a fair bit more, to the point where it might not be my least favorite from the band anymore. Like maybe, I don't know. It's really difficult to gauge because I'm pretty sure that band's like main discography is nothing but 9s and 10s from me. But I listened to that. My opinion on it grew. Very happy to have done so. Just an essential, dark, miserable, brooding album.
And a discography of albums that are like already feeling difficult to listen to. That one is like, I mean, you feel like dirty while you're listening to it. You feel like you're a danger to yourself while you're listening to that album. Like it is really, even I can't play that through front to back that often because
it's hard.
It's just really tough.
I mean, like if you ever get upset that Ian Curtis, met his tragic fate, and you're just like, man, what would Joy Division have become in the future if he hadn't died? I direct you to the Twilight Sad. If nothing else, you should hear No One Can Ever Know purely for that thick Scottish brogue singing those really like weirdly catchy refrains on that. The so sick to death at the sight of you now. Yeah. It's so I love his voice so much. But I also listened to 14 Autumns and 15 Winters, which this is how you know you've been hosting a podcast for a long time, is that I put that on and felt deeply, deeply nostalgic for 2020. I remembered when I first put that on, and I was listening to it when I was working a retail job, and I just remember like putting that on, and then like that and Nobody Wants to Be Here, Nobody Wants to Leave. I listened to those during that job, and I had to like after the first track of both, I had to like go somewhere and sit down away from people. However, I guess the last sort of things that I'll mention here are firstly, I have punk lover though I am, I'd never listened to the Misfits before, like ever. And I felt
Mm.
like a fake fan. I was just like, why haven't I done this? This feels wrong. Like when I picture Morgan, my best friend in the world, in my head, he's always wearing a Misfits shirt. So I'm just like, why is it taking me this long? So I listened to a couple of theirs. I listened to an EP from that. They have a lot of EPs that people love. But I also listened to Earth AD / Wolf's Blood, as well as their like first debut record. And like I really like these projects. That said, I do have a bit of a ceiling with them in that one, the production is terrible. In a
Oh
way
yeah.
that works. Like these songs sound like almost all of them sound like they were recorded in a live context, but like it's still not very good. Like everything blends together. The mixes are not clear whatsoever. And that kind of adds to the vibe in a weird way. I can't really explain it. It's just like it makes you feel like you are in the middle of a mosh pit and you can only kind of hear the band. But it works because Glenn Danzig is a motherfucker of a vocalist. He's frequently compared to Elvis Presley in terms of his vocal delivery. And before, I think I considered that just to be like a, really? That sounds weird. And then you listen to it and you're like, oh, okay, no, actually, this does kind of work. And also his range and just like when he really, really just like bellows out, cool shit, honestly. I really like him. One thing I was sort of caught off guard by is like, God, this band is so full of edgelords. Like the lyrics to every single song that I've listened to, it's like balanced with like really, really provocative, like very much anti like authoritarian shit, which is like, I mean, for the early 70s is like, that's pretty cool, that they were, that on the wavelength. But it's literally a balance of just like a bunch of really edgy teenager shit and also like, I'm gonna turn into a werewolf. It's just a strange combination that's like weirdly endearing. I can't help but like it. It also doesn't hurt that like all of their albums are like 24 minutes long. All of the songs are like a minute, so you'll blast through it real easily. It's a lot of good fun. That said, there are a lot of reasons as to why I can imagine people not getting along with this music as I would them getting along with this music. But who knows? I know Morgan again is a really big fan, so I'm sure he might like recommend other deeper cuts. So yeah, that's about the extent of everything that I've listened to this week.
Alrighty, well, I'll start off by shouting out a record that I believe Jake shouted out last week, I want to say, or I can't remember. A new album from the Japanese black metal band Psy.
Black metal and others.
Difficult to really define this, but they have been around for over 30 years now, and it was a few weeks ago on What We've Been Listening To segment that August shouted out their EP, Ghastly Funeral Theatre. But they're back with their first album in 4 years, their most well-received album since in over a decade. This is being the new record, Shiki. Now, this is my first exposure to this band. I didn't really have an idea of what to expect other than like, sick black metal shit with that distinctly Eastern tinge. And I was fucking gobsmacked by this album. I don't know like if I've heard a record that rocks as hard as this fucking thing does all year. Like this album is just ballistic. And it was like, I feel like we've been listening to and talking about so much like avant-garde, abstracted metal lately that I wasn't really prepared to just be thrown on my ass by how like purely primally enjoyable and simple but effective this particular band's brand of metal is. Like, it is just the fucking hardest riffs you've ever heard in your life. But also, I brought up this Eastern tinge that they have, and that wasn't just this kind of like offhand thing I was saying. Like, there's distinct instrumentation that's incorporated here that makes it feel very distinct from a lot of other black metal or prog metal or metal of its kind. You have the prominent inclusion of bongos and hand-played drums and all kinds of like wind instruments and specifically traditional Japanese instrumentation as well, mixed in with this like kind of goofy, almost power metal at certain points, sense of like ridiculous glee.
A jazz fusion keyboard shit. It's so dope.
It is like in a lot of ways, it's like a jazz fusion power metal album in some respects. Like, it brings together so many different aesthetics that I've never heard combined in a metal record quite the way that this band do. It's an outstanding album, one of the best records of the year so far, certainly one of the best metal records of the year so far. So it's no surprise that Jake loves it, but it gets a hearty endorsement from me as well. And I know that August is a big fan of this as well. He's rated it quite positively too. So yeah, check this shit out if you want some ridiculously fun metal that sounds like nothing you've ever heard before in quite this way. A record that I absolutely have come to adore in the very short time I've had with it. I couldn't believe how much I actually fully loved it from out the gate. It was really, really immediate. One of the most instantaneously fantastic metal records of the year. The last thing that I will shout out is another new release, an album that has just basically instantaneously shot its way up into my top 10 albums of the year. A complete curveball record as well. I checked this out on a whim because it was Stereogum's album of the week last week. The album is called Heaven Come Crashing by an artist called Rachika Nayar, who is kind of like an ambient but also sort of like noise shoegaze artist. Like, she works with a very diverse palette in terms of instrumental electronic music. It's very synthetic, but it's also a prominent incorporation of guitar. The reference point that, and I definitely stole this from Ian Culver when he recommended this record recently. The biggest comparison I can make is that it's a lot like M83. But like specifically the interlude tracks on albums like Before the Dawn Heals Us and Saturday's Youth and Hurry Up We're Doomed, but like specifically that era where they were like, I have a very strong attachment to early M83 because when I was growing up and I discovered them, they were doing something that I still to this day, I wish more bands would do, which is combine shoegaze with noise music. And just do this like really euphoric, intense thing. And some bands more recently have come around to flirting with this kind of aesthetic. But what I loved about Rachika Nayar's new album, Heaven Come Crashing, is that it plays with this and it gives you variations and exercises in the sound, but it also has these heavily atmospheric and beautifully melodic pieces that are just totally beguiling and emotional. It's just a ridiculously emotionally intense record, especially considering that it's for the most part has no vocals and is mostly just kind of instrumental synthetic electronic pieces. There is the epic 10-minute Tetramorph. The second song on here is just one of my favorite pieces of music that I've not only has come out this year, but that I've heard this year in general. I was reminded as well, one of the other comparisons I made is it's kind of like the instrumental like interludes or like ambient moments on a Deftones or a Deaf Heaven album, but if that was the whole record essentially, and it was kind of like the noise aspect or the kind of tension of those pieces was really turned up. But yeah, and there's even like bits of drum and bass and like explosive moments on this record that will happen like every 20 minutes or so and just completely give you this intense, cathartic, just explosive thing. It's a record that I've listened to probably at least 7 or 8 times in the last week or so since I discovered it. And I mean, it's just on indefinite rotation for me. It taps into a particular taste that I have for really immediate, but also moody and melodic and emotional electronic music that I just am an absolute sucker for. It's a record that is extremely under the radar as well from an artist that does not get enough shine. I cannot recommend it wholeheartedly enough. Jake, I know you gave it a shot this week as well.
It's fucking terrific. I mean, basically co-sign everything. I think one of the standout things about this album is how just it is mixing a lot of different stuff together, but it never sacrifices its accessibility or listenability to do that, to the point where I can just breathlessly recommend it to anyone who even has a passing interest in electronic music, because it's also just so very emotional and like evocative. It's sometimes music like this can just kind of go right over your head a little bit, but like this feels like it taps into something very human and primal, and it really is a terrific fucking record. I think the only thing that's holding me back from like pushing it to the upper echelons of my favorites list this year is that it does run a bit long in my opinion, and it does sort of peak a bit earlier. But that said, those peaks are easily some of the best stuff you will hear all year.
100%. Jen, as our guest, and of course, because it has been a while since you've been on the show, is there any records or things that you've heard recently, really in any amount of time, that you want to shout out as things that you think are interesting or worth hearing?
I am going to speed through some new releases I've caught up on in the past week and a half or so. Joey Badass, 2000. I think last time I was on the show, I mentioned I was listening to Before the Money, and I listened to a lot of Joey Badass, and 2000 is great. Survivor's Guilt, fucking amazing song.
Yeah.
Sadly, can't say I love 2000. I don't like it as much as All American Badass or Before the Money, but really good album. Another recent release, Cheat Codes, amazing.
Yeah.
Danger Mouse and Black Thought. Beats on beats on beats on beats. I have the riffs to the title track and Strangers like buried into my brain right now. I cannot get them out of my head. Amazing album. And I know you guys cited this lyric specifically, but every hour or so, I think about popping with the same pistol they popped Reagan with.
Jesus Christ.
Another musical journey kind of is I'm listening to the Johnny Cash American recordings from the 90s to the 2000s. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit, Jake, but I don't think I've ever had a more ecstatic reaction than after listening to the first American recordings, putting on the second one and hearing what I didn't know when I started was the Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers instrumentation to Rowboat. The look on my face. Unchained is an amazing album. It's like probably right up there with At Folsom Prison for me in terms of Johnny Cash's output. I love it. I think about Rusty Cage still constantly. God, what a cover. Woo! God, what a song. Whew. And then
you got to be a special kind of great artist to debatably have your best run of records be cover songs. Like, who else has done that? Nobody.
Yeah.
Covering himself too. Like one of Unchained's best moments is when he ends with basically a cover of I've Been Everywhere.
Like Tom Petty like doing and the Heartbreakers doing the backing instrumentation to Johnny Cash is like when Pearl Jam were Neil Young's backing band for an entire album on fucking what's it called? Mirrorball.
I was gonna say I can picture the cover.
Yeah, which is like it's just like one of those things that if you don't know that it's what it is a thing going into the record, it just kind of blows your mind and just gives you this completely stunning experience. I mean, shit, I've never listened to any of the American records in full, but man, I really do want to just put aside the time to really just like luxuriate in the distinct vibe of those albums, because I have heard a lot of the covers individually. I'm a big fan, for instance, of a lot of the covers on the third album, Solitary Man. Like, there's a great cover of Bonnie Prince Billy's I See a Darkness. There's a cover of The Mercy Seat on that as well. An amazing cover of that. So yeah, I want to actually set aside the time to listen to those records in full, because I'm sure there'll be some more surprises in there that'll really that'll really land for me. But man.
Jen, you got me nostalgic. I'm just gonna download all. Johnny Cash was one of the first musical artists I ever got into, and as such, I have not like come around to that end of the bell curve yet, where I rediscover all of these things that I started my journey with. So now I'm just like, oh man, I gotta put on American 4 now. That shit's so hard.
Between Johnny Cash and Warren Zevon, I love like country artists that like know they're gonna die, and so like deliberately spend like the last 10 years of their career like making these like I'm going to die soon type albums where they like
Leonard Cohen,
where they literally just write their legacy like in front of you even after they've already established their classic records. That's like something that unifies Cash and Zevon, and they're probably two of like my favorite classic era Americana artists. So like that's just super sick. All right, let's get into our first review of the day, and I think it makes sense for the sake of our sanity to talk about J.I.D's album, The Forever Story. J.I.D is an Atlanta-based rapper, singer-songwriter, hip-hop artist, member of Dreamville, and an artist who has, I would say, fairly consistently over the last 10 years made his name bit by bit through a series of, I think mainly what I initially knew him from was a lot of his feature appearances on bigger artist songs, but behind the scenes, he has absolutely been building up his own catalog, particularly under the tutelage of J. Cole and the other Dreamville compatriots. As was mentioned at the top of this episode, his last major release was 2018's DiCaprio 2, the sequel to the initial DiCaprio EP from 2015, but he also put out his remarkable debut record, The Never Story, which I'm pretty sure I heard at least once when it came out, although I definitely don't remember it enough to judge. But The Forever Story, I think, is not necessarily a sequel to The Never Story, but obviously from the title callback to the fact that the album contains songs that are like literal sequels to songs off of The Never Story, as well as revisiting themes that are introduced on that record and talking about how far J.I.D has come. This feels like both a career summary moment for J.I.D, but also like a really ostentatious step forward as well. I think this is a record that is bringing some deserved shine to J.I.D, not only as a great album constructor, like a great artist in terms of knowing how to structure really compelling releases, but also as an incredible technical performer as well. J.I.D, I think, is one of the most technically gifted rappers to come up in the last 10 or so years. Incredibly talented and incredibly not only capable with a mic, but kind of transfixing in his ability to spin these intense, rhythmically and melodically dense bars and constructed songs, as well as to ride flows that are kind of head spinning. And I don't think that I've heard J.I.D demonstrate that as remarkably consistently and just continuously amazingly as he does on this record. I was pretty stunned by how instantaneously I responded to this. It feels like the most confident, assured, and just in your face work from J.I.D yet. Now, Jen, as our guest, you have come onto the show to talk about this particular record as well. What are your feelings on how this record lands, your feelings on how it compares to J.I.D's previous work, if you're familiar, and what you think on the whole of this very, very interesting and remarkable new album?
J.I.D interestingly described this as his origin story album. And after listening to it again, after reading that quote and reading some more interviews with him this week, I think that's true. He talks a lot about his family and his upbringing and what made him the person he is, which I think is a really interesting perspective, considering how deep he is in his discography. And yeah, I love DiCaprio 2, but this completely threw me. I mean, I've listened to quite a bit of J.I.D both inside and outside of his discography. I mean, we talked about it when we did the Denzel Curry album. The first time I ever heard him was on Amine's last record, where he gave an amazing feature on that. He's a great feature verse artist. He can really elevate a song. But this is my first time in a bit listening to a full record from him, and it's interesting how many different avenues he explores. You know, beat and flow switches all over these songs and different emotional approaches to similar topics on tracks that directly contrast each other, like Brud and Them and Sista and Them. And I do think this is my favorite JID album so far.
Yeah, I was really taken by how like immaculately constructed the album is, but also like how great of a job it does of throwing you into JID's world essentially and letting him kind of pull you along through essentially these rapid fire tales of his family, of his upbringing, of his relationships. It's a very, I feel like, personal album, and an album that's very much defined by the relationships that have made him who he is, particularly the familial relationships as well, a really consistent theme that comes through on this record, and one that I think gives it a sort of center that, above and beyond JID's remarkable technical prowess, which he's even better than he's ever been in that respect, gives it this like additional layer of depth that I think makes it easy to connect to and elevates it from just a really remarkable and impressive piece of technical achievement to something that feels like a capital G great album through and through. It almost feels like too obvious of a reference point, especially considering the fact that the de facto closer, which is interestingly not on the album proper because JID couldn't get a sample cleared, but the song 2007, which is intended to end the record, like that song deliberately makes reference to some of the specific musical reference points that JID grew up being influenced by. One of those, of course, being Kendrick Lamar. There's a specific bar in that song about listening to Section 80. And I think it might even be the fact that he couldn't get the high power sample on that song cleared. I think might even be the reason why 2007 isn't on the streaming version of the album, hilariously enough. But I bring this up to emphasize the fact that while it may seem an obvious comparison, I feel there are some serious parallels between JID and Kendrick. And this feels to me, and this may seem a little bit like a overpraising to some extent, considering the lofty heights of the comparison I'm about to make, but this does feel a lot like JID's Good Kid, Mad City. Not even just in terms of it being this momentous release for him that represents a kind of realizing of all of the talent that he's displayed into the sprawling picture, essentially, of his entire world and the scope of everything and everyone that makes him who he is, but also in the cinematic quality that it has. I mean, the cover, I think, is really, really telling because it is a dense cover that features all of these different individuals and people and is very much emphasizes the communal aspect of this record, and the fact that he's framing it as well as the story too from that title, I think, is a deliberate attempt to evoke a kind of format of storytelling, of construction that is very similar to me to what Kendrick was trying to do in those early days with the way that he set up and framed Good Kid, Mad City. And they're both really similar records, I feel like, in a lot of ways. It doesn't have the sort of linearity that Good Kid, Mad City has, but it also doesn't need that as well, because there's a necessarily more sprawling tone to the Forever Story and to the way that it unfolds, into the aspects of JID's world that it speaks to. I mean, from the de facto opener Radar as well, which is just like a fucking dizzying. Like, JID is just completely spinning off the radar. I can't believe I just said that. It's the name of the song. Spinning off. He's just literally going fucking bug nutty on this song. Like, he immediately comes in with the hottest, hypest flow that you could possibly imagine that maybe he's ever even had. And the beat construction, the beat choice, the production as well, he has completely realized how to unify his voice with the musical world that he sees himself coming from and that he sees himself existing in. And it results in a record that feels like it has all of those familiar elements of those sort of like landmark personal storytelling hip-hop records, like the Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, Mad Cities and all that kind of thing. But also it feels very 2022. It feels very current. It feels very vital. And I mean, every time I listen to it, it's more entertaining. I'm picking up on more subtle different allusions and references and bits of wordplay as well. JID is fucking funny too. And that's another thing that I think emphasizes the Kendrick comparison too as well, because as much as, you know, music journalists and media like to paint Kendrick as this serious storyteller and Good Kid, Mad City as this capital S serious piece of art, like from that point and then before that point and continuing from that point, Kendrick has been incredibly aloof as well in the way that he has written and constructed music, and he's never really taken himself all that seriously. And J.I.D, I think, is operating on a similar wavelength where, yeah, you get, in the same way that Kendrick and all these other artists and Cole as well, you get that level of braggadocio, you get that level of kind of like flexing and stuff, but it's always just a part of something bigger and a part of something more complicated and dynamic that J.I.D is able to do, and that he does consistently on this record. I mean, I cannot say enough good things about it. It is it's a long record, especially when you consider and throw on 2007 as the actual closer. It has moments that don't quite connect as perfectly as others. It has a little bit of bloat in the same way that a record like Good Kid, Mad City does, or 2014 Forest Hills Drive, or whatever reference points you want to bring back to in terms of what J.I.D is evoking and doing his own spin on here. But I mean, he's just so consistently entertaining and compelling that it's difficult to even hold any of that against the album at all. It's one of the most fun and one of the most enjoyable records, hip-hop records of the year to really sink your teeth into. And it's so ridiculously entertaining in a way that makes it giddily addictive.
Every year, since, you know, hip-hop's sort of the dominant genre in popular music right now, we get a crop of releases that every year that tend to be the heavy hitters, the albums, the hip-hop albums that like people are going to remember this year in history for. Like, you know, last year we had Simbi. This year we've got stuff like Billy Woods, we've got stuff like Black Thought and Danger Mouse, and we certainly have J.I.D. And I think that J.I.D is an interesting voice right now, just because it feels like when he came up, those Kendrick comparisons to him early on really kind of like, I think, dulled a bit of the initial hype of his, just because he does have a very fast, nasally, kind of higher pitched delivery that does remind people of Kendrick. And I think a lot of people couldn't really look past that. They were like, oh, he's the next Kendrick. And he's got a line on here that goes like, you know, I'm not the next anybody, I'm me. And it's true, he deserves to stand on his own. And I think this is the album that has truly like been best representative of that so far, is that this feels more like less like a collection of good hip hop songs and more the product of someone who wants to flex their ability to tell a story on songs on here like Crack Sandwich, which is an early album highlight for me, which tells this really, you know, compelling story about J.I.D in his youth and the kind of person he was. And I feel like really illuminates sort of a pocket of like how specific Black youth live in America right now, where they are simultaneously pushed into this kind of very white, very gentrified idea of like a gifted kid, of like someone who's like doing well in school, someone who's smart, but also someone who has to sort of belong to an environment that J.I.D sort of inextricably can't separate from like his roots, and that occasionally will make him violent because he sees that there's someone has an altercation with his sister and he busts this dude's face, which, you know, again, good for you, bro. It's stuff like that that really illuminates J.I.D as not just like, hey, here's a good rapper. It's like, no, hey, here's a good artist. If I have any issues with like DiCaprio 2, it's that it's like front to back a solid project, but it was something that I kind of got less and less out of, just because it was like an amazing technical showcase for J.I.D. And that was kind of where the appeal ended for me with that record, is that it didn't really go much further to sort of, you know, cement him as a distinct voice. It's like he's a great technical rapper, got great bars, he's funny, he's earnest, he speaks on a lot of honest issues, but it feels like that album is sort of like something that is trying to herald something to come, and the Forever Story feels like that's something. And admittedly, I am probably a little less hot on this album than you guys are, or the general public at large, just because I do have select nitpicks, I guess, with an experience like this. There are sometimes on here where I think the production is just fucking fantastic. There's one song on here that has like the introduction of basically like gospel vocals, and it's just stunning stuff. There's lots of like really sort of psychedelic-esque beats on here that are just fantastic. I think that like we talked about how, you know, like Danger Mouse delivered some of his best work on cheat codes, and honestly I think the best stuff here kicks that fucking out of the stadium. However, there are still moments where he rides beats that like are so suited to his very rapid fire spitting, and I don't like the aesthetic of these beats that are like, they are basically, they're nothing but hi-hats, and they just rattle like at the very top of the mix, and it sounds, and it's just so loud, and I hate the way that that sounds. I know that that's a me problem, but there's some of them on here that just, those like really rattly beats that allow him to just kind of go off. It's like, I want to pay more attention to J.I.D here, but I'm also trying to distract myself from the fact that this sounds like someone is like got one of those like steel bells and is like shaking it right next to my ear. I think the greatest example of which is on the dual track of Brudenem and Systenem, which are, in my opinion at least, I think Brudenem is one of the ones, like one of the weaker tracks on the album for me, mainly because like this hook is fucking annoying, and J.I.D's very nasally voice repeats it over and over and over, and I could have done without that. And then Systenem comes on, and this is just one of the best hip-hop songs of the year, and it's just like, it's a bit jarring to go from such a leap for me, but it's also just like the storytelling here is fucking beautiful. I think the moment that really sort of sealed the deal for me with this whole experience was probably the penultimate track, Better Days, which is just kind of heartbreaking. The story about his friend since like childhood, and how he would go over to like his mom would drop him off at his friend's house really early in the morning because he couldn't catch a bus to school because they didn't come to like his district. And so he like grows up with this person who's like bonded to him like a brother. And then like you sort of see their relationship develop over the years and even kind of break away at the end. And it's just, it's really heartbreaking. The way he just weaves all of this is so good. And I was thinking then, I was just like, when I was listening to that song, I'm like, you know, this album, this is what the new Pusha T should have been. Not just because I think that J.I.D, like Kendrick comparisons, definitely there's a lot of aesthetic similarities between them and their style, but I think that J.I.D has a lot in common with Pusha T. And in my opinion, at least, he's a lot more versatile than Pusha T is, at least, you know, his batting average these days, which is like, again, it's almost dry. That's an album where Pusha T's pen game is great. All of its issues that we had with it are kind of external to him. Whereas this feels like Pusha T if he was in like fucking Clips mode, but the production actually, you know, backed him 75% of the time in a way that actually complimented him. And it feels like we're getting something that is so story driven that it's like, this feels like an album that is coming from an elder statesman in hip hop, but it isn't. It's a more youthful voice. And like the Pusha T album, I mean, J.I.D's pen game on here is basically faultless. I don't really think that there's a single line here where I'm not like actively responding to it in an emotional way, or just thinking that it's very clever, or thinking that it's very funny. It's a very holistic experience that like, it is also just a little too long. I think it results from the fact that there are songs on here like Dance Now and Brudenem and Just in Time that I feel are really less essential cuts on here that could trim this down to like a really tight 48 to 50 minute long record that would like just this would be like hip hop album of the year contender for me personally. It has some fat that I think should be trimmed a little bit, but regardless, I still think it's a pretty damn great album. And it's nice to see and be reminded of the fact that a lot of the younger, more popular you know, people who are holding the vanguard of hip hop, like Lil Sims last year, are maintaining their ground so well, because like this sort of does feel like an album that, you know, J.I.D's been off the grid for a little while now, and this sort of feels like, all right, man, this is your shot, because DiCaprio 2 had a whole lot of promise behind it. A whole lot of people love that album. If you can deliver on this record, people are going to be looking out for whatever you have to release for the rest of your career. And I think that he has basically cemented his place in modern hip hop with Forever Story.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that some of those moments that you're not as into, I definitely am more into them. But I look, it's just a record that I honestly have not been able to get enough of. And I just like I've been putting it on like this whole week, and I've just been kind of like, it's put me in a particularly good mood that like I actually find myself feeling like shit when it's over, because I just he makes me feel so like giddily excited to be listening to like about hip hop and about music at the moment. And I think
he's
a
very
big part
fun
of it,
artist, yeah.
but yeah, exactly. The big part of it is how like ridiculously funny he is and how ridiculously good at hooks he is. Like I've been like just walking around my flat, just being like, pull up the pumpkin, punk me, bitch, pull up the pumpkin, punk me, ho, pull up the pumpkin, punk me, bitch, like literally off and on just about
It's so
every
good.
day this week.
That is so good.
It's like the off D's of this album.
Yeah, and I mean, on that note as well, I mean, Can't Punk Me with the Earth Gang feature as well. Like, this song is just so fucking fun. Like, shout out as well. Like, this is probably the funniest song on the album, just because like Earth Gang are incredibly funny people, and there's just so many like individual zingers, especially from Dr. Dot, who maybe has like the funniest verse in the whole album when he's like, I be stealing for the pure thrill, running up buildings like the Grinch in Whoville, which absolutely made me lose it. And one of my favorite lines on the record, which is, I don't really fuck with these fellas like Gandhi, which is an incredible slight at Gandhi, who people maybe tend to forget was more than a little bit of racist, in spite of all of his, famously peaceful preaching. So just to have a line like, I don't really fuck with these fellas like Gandhi, that shit just got me. It was a really, really funny moment. Yeah, and there's just like so much of that. Like, I really do love a song like Dance Now as well, because of how like irreverent it is in particular as well. I like how J.I.D kind of almost like both pokes fun at himself here, but also kind of like talks himself up as well by like talking from the perspective of people who are like, trying to minimize his success and his talent and stuff. I love the line where he's like, they're saying J.I.D a scribbler, he's silly with it, which just makes me smile. And I think this song has like one of the best hooks on the record as well. I love that part in the pre-chorus where he's like writing this particular like cadence where he's like, fellas say I can't lie, damn lie, ain't dapping no hands, sanitize, we gonna slide in your man, landslide, there's a knot in my pants, Hancock. Like, he just does this voice.
So good.
Where it like literally just, and then you go into the Kenny Mason chorus, and it's like the polar opposite of the way that J.I.D sounds in that little pre-chorus bit. It's just so good, and I just completely lose it. I think Crack Sandwich, which you mentioned, I think is the best storytelling song on the record, along with System as well. I love the because J.I.D is vocal about the fact that he is one of 7 siblings, and not only does he kind of like give you a sense of what that environment is like as well, you literally get samples of like his brothers and sisters, of his parents, like coming through on this record, so you actually get a presence from them as well. One of my favorite moments on the record, which is on, again, 2007, which I'm regrettably not on the streaming version of the album, but if you haven't heard it, go and check it out. It has a great little moment where it actually has like a whole verse from J.I.D's dad, and it starts up with one of the funniest lines of the year, which is, "This is my son, he came from these nuts." Literally just fucking sends me every single time.
That's he says it. He sees it so
like he sees it so bluntly as well, like he's like teaching us how it works, and it's so fucking funny. Another song I love, Surround Sound, one of the absolutely fucking hardest songs on this whole record. Amazing features from Baby Tate and 21 Savage, especially as well.
Baby Tate.
That fucking Aretha Franklin sample. I just fucking love this shit, good. Man. It's so good.
Hell yeah.
J.I.D has a secret weapon we have seen on this album. This motherfucker can sing.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, that was really surprising.
Sing. That was a big surprise. Like, when you get to Cody Blue 31, which is a really nice, how do you describe it? Like, serene song about him having to help a family through hard times of someone that he knew who passed away. And it's motivating them to, as he puts it, swang on. And he just has this beautiful singing voice as he's like praying.
Yeah.
And it goes from him to this whole chorus of people just swang-o, swang-o. And it's amazing. And you hear that singing voice on Better Days too. The chorus on Better Days has been in my head all day.
Can I just say,
so
like,
good.
how amazing, like, the thing about DiCaprio too, like, that was a really, like, it was a fun record, it was a promising record, but the thing about it is that all the best songs are on the first half of that album, and it kind of just falls off. Whereas the great thing about Forever Story is how, like, well-paced it is, and also secretly how many fucking bangers and like some of the best songs are saved for that final stretch. I mean, if you include 2007, the last 4 songs on this record from Money onwards are just like some of the best songs that J.I.D has ever released. Like I along with that hook from Can't Punk Me, the other thing I've had stuck in my head constantly is the fucking fantastic sample on Money. Like, the fucking beat and the sample on the song is like, it's fucking like, it reminds me of like early Kanye in a certain sense, like how ridiculously gleeful it is, but also like the tone of the sample as well. Like, it's just so happy. Like, it just makes me feel so fucking euphoric and shit. And he literally he compares himself to Jimmy Neutron, mixed in a nuclear bomb.
My god. Oh, it's so good.
It's just ridiculously funny. And he just and another one of my favorite lines of the record where he's like, I ate so many bologna sandwiches as a child, I'd kill a fella if he made one for me right now. Just
which he then switches.
He switches it up, and it's like he makes it more wholesome. And in the second verse, also appreciate a song that takes in the same line, takes a moment to diss both Hulk Hogan and Joe Rogan for no reason other than the fact that he can.
Fuck Joe Rogan.
It's so good. And yeah, you mentioned Better Days, Jen. That song, the fucking words on that song. God, it's so good.
It's so good.
It's ridiculously fucking fun and awesome. Louder too as well. Like, this is like one of the most blood pumping songs, because there's a moment here where like the beat he's riding locks into a tempo that's so fast, and it's like these little bass hits that that are kind of like hitting really, really quickly, and he's like matching them, and it's almost like the beat is kind of pushing him forward and making him rap faster and faster, and he just completely, like, he manages to continue to ramp up the tension and the flow and the power of the way that he's performing, to the extent that you just feel like the sky is continuously the limit, and he's just continuing to push up against it as well. Like, his verses on that song in particular are fucking blood pumping. And then Raven Lene, just amazing. Another artist who's had a really good year as well. She put out her own album earlier this year that felt like a real arrival moment for her, and she comes in on the bridge here and just delivers some perfect, beautiful vocals. I'm thoroughly won over by this record, and I have had a lot of fun listening to it this week.
One of the best moments in music this whole year is when he cuts off that last Poet sample at the start of Radar and just fucking jumps right into the beat. And Radar is so cool because it starts and it sounds like you're in a mosh pit, and then the beat switch happens and you sound like the mosh pit has taken to the fucking streets.
I tell you what it reminds me of, and again, I hate to keep making the Kendrick comp, but like when I'm listening to Radar, it's like, and especially like Radar coming off the back of Galaxy, it reminds me a lot of like blood going into DNA on Damn. Like, it's just the energy level and the way in which the album kind of just completely breaks the door down after kind of lulling you into this, like, because Galaxy has these sort of like more conventional sort of like pretty hip-hop samples and sounds as well as that, like, that I think that sample, and again I think it's from Jed's dad, where he's like, oh, you don't pick up the motherfucking phone. Yeah, you are who I thought you was. That moment's just so fucking funny, and then you just get bam, you just get that fucking second song coming in like that, and it's a moment. Anyway, shall we do our favorite tracks and ratings then for Jed's The Forever Story? Jake, why don't you go first?
three favorite tracks got to be Better Days, definitely my favorite. System M, close behind, and I didn't mention it, but Cody Blue 31.
Yeah.
Fuck. That's a fucking tune right there. And that one, and I mean, hell, and there's Crack Sandwich too. Jesus Christ. Least favorite track, probably just because of its placement. I'm gonna say Just in Time, just because if you took that one out, basically the second half of this album is basically flawless. So that's what I'll say. And I give the album an effusive 7.5, likely to change.
All right. Jim, why don't you go next?
Three favorite tracks, Radar, Crack Sandwich, and System M. Least favorite track, I'm just gonna say Just in Time as well. The Stars and Just in Time are kind of the weaker point of the album for me. I'm gonna give this an 8. I love this.
All right. My three favorite tracks are Crack Sandwich, System M, and man, Money, I guess. Fuck, it's hard. Least favorite, honestly, like there's really nothing that stands out to me as particularly on the weaker side. Like, I really, really like this song, and this is just telling you how good the record is, that I guess I would pick Can't Make You Change, maybe, but I really like that song. So it's, yeah, I mean, there's no easy answers there. The album gets an emphatic 8.5 from me, and again, like Jake, I would not be surprised if I end up bumping this a little bit further down the line, which means that we get an average of 8.0 for JID's The Forever Story. Now, let's get into our second review of the day, which is, of course, Muse, Will of the People. And Jake, the way you look right now is the way that I expected you would look right now going into this. And look, I just want to say ahead of time, I don't want to make this hard for you, any harder than it needs to be. You and I both know how this is going to go. And it's a road we've been down before. And it's a dynamic, I think, that actually makes for really entertaining podcast content. But I realize it can be somewhat morale defeating to have to go through it. So I'll just state for the record, in case we have any Muse fans watching, I am quite enjoying this album. I am going to be a big proponent of it, and I'm going to say more nice things than negative about it. So if you've come here and you don't want to hear Muse exclusively be shat on, never fear. I know I have done my fair share of Muse shitting and my share of, hot takes about aspects of Muse that I like. I have plenty to say about this record that I think Muse fans will find somewhat satisfactory, but I want to let Jake lead off here because I know that you want to get it out of your system. You want to rip off the Band-Aid. Will of the People, Muse. Jake, how do you feel this album holds up to the recent streak? And I mean streak in the most derogatory sense possible of records that Muse have been working off the back of. And what was your experience like listening to this album this week?
Okay, a couple things. One, sending Ryley down the path of the Muse discography as my reward for winning the quiz this year has definitely had mixed results. I'll admit it was probably the discography choice I put the least amount of thought into, just because it happened to line up with the release of a new album, and because I was just like, oh, Ryley's got some takes about this band that are a little bit more interesting than your garden variety Muse takes, so I might as well. I feel like that'll create some good content, and it has. So rest assured, I don't regret that decision. But it's done something where it has forced me to reckon with a band that, again, setting a precedent here, a band that I like overall. I really like their earlier stuff. As a matter of fact, I listened to some of their earlier stuff and the three previous records last night, just so I could come at this with the best perspective possible.
Honestly, I respect that so much. No, I know how difficult that must have been for you.
I didn't want to sound like I didn't want to come at this and sound a like inarticulate or unrefined or just be like blah, 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 new album bad, blah, 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 Muse bad, new Muse bad, because like it's such a boring take. Like I can't change how I feel to suit that, but the narrative of the first half of discography good, second half mid to bad narrative is one that it's like, yeah, I agree with this assessment. And rest assured, Muse fans who are getting something out of this album, and I'm sure like fucking Fantano gave this a not good. You have heard plenty of negative things said about this album at this point, and I'm sure you are sick of them. I'm not necessarily saying that I'm going to change that or that my thoughts are going to be more nuanced or interesting than somebody like him, but I wanted to attack this with the best perspective possible. I love albums like Absolution, my favorite album from theirs, I think is still really tight. I love that album, front to back. Doesn't really drop the ball at any point. I think Black Holes and Revelations is good. I certainly not to the degree that Ryley feels about it, but I really like Origin of Symmetry, even if I don't think that album is quite their best or anywhere really near their best. The thing is that originally we were supposed to have more than 3 people on this podcast episode, and I saw the vision of how this was going to go in my head. And originally, what I planned is that I was going to say fucking nothing. I was going to sit here. I was going to listen to Jen and August rip this a new asshole and Ryley present his beguiling defense. And I was going to sit here, say nothing the whole time, wait for someone to tell us to say, hey, Jake, how do you feel? And then say no. That's it. That was my plan. And it didn't really necessarily go down like that, because I mean, it's just like, it's like the Panic at the Disco album last week when I got really mad at it, and I like actively became angrier when talking about it because I'm also angry at myself, because it's just like, oh, fucking another person hates this album that everyone hates. Fucking stop the presses, unique opinion alert. Like, I don't fucking, but I just had to fucking eat my vegetables here and just sort of accept the fact that I feel the way I feel and nothing's going to change that. Mm-hmm. And the thing is about the latter half of Muse's career is that I don't find it as wholly detestable as a lot of people do, but I also don't find it as like lukewarmly defensible as some of the more kind people might either. I'm a hater who's firmly in the middle. Something like Simulation Theory, for example, I think is a deeply misguided effort that nonetheless retains being at some level of charming and chintzy, even though it's not good. It just has a quality about it that it's sort of like retro modern futurist sound, where they're also trying to sound like a fucking like the shittiest version of ELO possible. And it's like, I don't defend it, but I understand it. And I think that was the real breaking point with Will of the People with me, is that you look at it, and when it comes to the way this album is designed, this is easily the Muse album that is probably the bad Muse album that's the easiest to digest. It's a scant 38 minutes long. None of these songs are particularly long or ambitious. They're not doing some weird Pink Floyd drones thing where they get overly ambitious. And it feels like an album that is, if I'm going to harken back to what I had to say recently, it is designed to be consumed. And already not good favor with me. So that's just something I had to get over. However, when I sit down and listen to this, length becomes obsolete, because this crop of tracks here, I hate all of them. Like, all of them without exception. And and not for, and the ones that I have the most boring opinions on are the best ones on here, the best ones, which are the Ghosts, a completely edgeless, mostly harmless whatever of a nothing song that contains not a nary an original idea, but is at least a relent from the assault of the first part of the album. And then there's Verona and Euphoria. Verona's easily the closest this album gets to sounding okay, but it's also just an airless fart of a song that contains, again, there's nothing here lyrically, idea-wise, hook-wise, there's nothing. And then there's Euphoria, which is just, I mean, this is a song, like, I don't even have anything interesting negative to say about this. And if you want to come at me for saying my opinion on it's insubstantial, that's fine. But I just know that while this is on, it's music, it's functional, and I'm just waiting for it to be over. And that's the good things about the album. This starts out with the title track with Will of the People, which is just, in the year 2022, the thing I want to be reminded of course, is I want to think about sex offenders making music. That's something I want to be reminded of. I don't want to think about Marilyn Manson. And that's before I listen to the albums that people like that are actually dog shit, but never mind.
To be clear, Jake is referencing the fact that Will of the People, the song, is a very clear ripoff of The Beautiful People. Improvement, in my opinion, but I could easily see a disagreement with that particular take.
They both suck ass, frankly.
The fact that they try to do it at all is disagreeable.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, like, that's the thing, is that I can't, like, it's not because it's like, oh, they ruined a great song. It's like, no, they just added their particular bland flavor to this, like, butter sandwich of an album. And it's like, and I mean, that's what this is. It's got parts in it that
the slice of toast.
It like rises in intensity on occasion, and then it goes straight into the death run of Compliance, which this is like, this song makes me almost want to apologize to Viagra Boys, because if you could get an award for the least dynamic song released this year, it's Compliance. Never mind the fact that this has the worst sounding synths since Smashing Pumpkins' Sear on any song. It's literally just, we just need your compliance. It sounds like a Styx song on, like, if somebody took like an opiate before they performed it. It's so lame. And then after that, there's Liberation, which is easy to talk about because it's basically the same song that carries the same sentiment of vague anti-authoritarian statements. And I get that this is Matt Bellamy's bit, right? Like, he's the guy who comes out and he's just like, the government's bad, fucking MK Ultra's bad, fucking K, fucking, and it's just like, whatever, man. The only
not even
reason...
that specific. It's just they.
Yeah, it's more like
they are bad. Whatever like, they is, I don't fucking know.
MGK Ultra.
They're fucking they're those fucking them governments trying to take away your genders. Fucking and it's just like Compliance and Liberation. The only reason that these songs aren't like half-star songs is because they're just not deserving of any legitimate hatred. They like, to actively hate these songs is like a choice you have to make, and frankly I choose to concede. And then there's Won't Stand Down, which rises to the level of Will of the People of being slightly better than the two songs before it, but in no way does it approach anything that's, again, interesting, because again, it's Liberation, Compliance, Won't Stand Down. Can you guess what these songs are about by their titles?
The funniest part of this album is the start of Won't Stand Down, when they very clearly steal the first few notes of Take On Me.
God, right? Right, like I was listening to that and I was just like,
I thought I was
stroke
things.
But it's like,
no, it's same
like
timbre
it's
too.
Those
it's
notes,
like...
but it's like played with like a, what's the instrument? Like a reggaeton sort of like plucked kind of like Caribbean type sound. And
yeah,
then the riff comes in.
and
it's
and
garish as hell.
Yeah, it's bad. And then we have the aforementioned Ghosts, and then we have You make me feel like it's Halloween. And let me just say here,
Lord.
this here is not the worst song on the album, but it's not the one I hate the most, but it's close, because this gets at the core of why I think this is the worst Muse album. And that is that it does not give a fuck. It's like, here's a 38-minute long album. Here's the same things we've been doing for the last 10 years. All of the songs, they're not going to sound like each other. There's no unifying ideas, or like the ambition on other Muse albums was misguided and detrimental to those albums, but it was there. It was present. On Will of the People, an album with this fucking portentous ass album cover and with songs like Liberation and Will of the People, and it's like, oh, it's an album for the moment, truly for the masses right now. And then they just stick this chintzy, lame ass "You Make Me Feel Like It's Halloween," like from the fucking title. It's like it is designed so that Muse fans, diehard Muse fans, who, God bless you, I love a lot of you, but this is a song that is designed to get you to go easy on this album. It's a song that's placement is here for no other reason than to go, oh, they don't take themselves seriously, so it's fine. And it's just like, sorry, no, I will not excuse this. This is bad. This sounds like shit. It has a terrible hook. If you're going to put in some obvious shitty pop song into your album, you might as well make it good. And this isn't good. It fucking sucks. And then immediately after that, there's Killer Be Killed, which has this a nice riff, I guess. It would be cool if a song was around it. There isn't. It's not here. And then,
there's a fucking Killer Be Killed. Killer Be Killed. I want to talk about Killer Be Killed because it is 5 minutes long, significantly longer than the rest of the album. And by the end of it, it devolves into a sludge of a mix. I can't place anything in this mix by the last minute of this song. And all just like watching a baking soda and vinegar reaction for too long. And it's all there, but what is it doing?
And he's got the
the worst skillet ass millennial woes on this song.
Look, I love you both. I consider you both friends of mine. Jake, you are probably one of the 2 or 3 closest people to me in my life in any sense. So I respect and I love the enthusiasm and the energy, and I love the genuine ownership of that really vitriolic hatred that you feel about this album. It's good for the podcast. And it's just one of those moments where it's like, I'm hearing a completely different record to you guys at some points anyway, particularly with the song Killer Be Killed, which I just think is unequivocally the best song this band have made since Knights of Sidonia. I absolutely adore this song on every level. It's fun, it's goofy, it's silly, it's all these sorts of things. And look, Jake has very smartly preempted my, they're taking themselves not very seriously at all. So I can't even say that. But I will say, I think this record is a bucket of fun. I think this record is ridiculously entertaining. And I think it trims a lot of or it completely does away with a lot of the aspects of the previous 2 Muse records that I outright despised, which was the self-seriousness, the kind of just ridiculous ponderance. These are songs that slap you in the face. Every single song on this record slaps you in the face, except for Ghost, which is kind of just, whatever. Every song on this record slaps you in the face. And it's like, you're either going to appreciate the ridiculousness with which they do that, or it's going to completely turn you off entirely, and you're going to be like, why am I listening to someone slapping me in the face?
This is a logical description of a fetish
you know what?
In music form. And Ryley, you're a Muse masochist.
That's the thing, though, is that's what really pisses me off about this, is that the things that Muse are going for on here and the areas of music that they're taking from, this is why I get pissed off when fucking like 14-year-olds on Twitter talk about the idea of camp, and it's just their excuse like of a word to get off on enjoying something shitty, like, this is camp. It's like, no, camp does not inherently mean that it sucks. This, on the other hand, is like, it's drawing from so many things that I actually do like with this sort of allowed arena rock thing. And whether or not you prefer them being more self-serious or them taking themselves less seriously, I think that's really just the sticking point here that really gets down to the heart of our opinions, where I am upset by the lack of ambition, whereas you are relieved at the sort of restraints that they were putting on themselves beforehand. And I understand that, I do. But also, I've been listening to Queen since I was 15. And if you want to tell me that any of this is even near their most mediocre material, you're a fucking liar. And just before you finish, I just have to say how much Look, listen. At the risk of turning into Ryley during our Arcade Fire segment, Muse putting out a song called We Are Fucking Fucked at the end of their album called Will of the People is such a disgusting prospect that it makes me want to beat someone to death. The fucking Arcade Fire, it's about joy in this band who have been gesturing at the idea since their inception of fighting against the power, however limp-dicked this sentiment might have been. And then at the end of this album, the will of the people, talking about liberation and fighting them and the man. And then at the end, you end your fucking album, you end this wet fart piece of shit album. At the very end, you end it with We Are Fucking Fucked. Do you think that I need to be listening to any of this shit in the first place? But then at the very end, this is the sentiment you leave me with? In the year of our Lord 2020, when the world's falling down around us, and you just give up at the end and say, we are fucking fucked, with a terrible fucking song, but with just... This is so antithetical to the identity that you've built for yourselves in the ugliest way possible. What is wrong with you? You're fucking fucked. Shut the fuck up. I don't want to hear you.
Jake?
No, absolutely not.
I'm genuinely, without a shred of sarcasm, glad you got that out of your system. I think that We Are Fucking Fucked is not a good song. But that my issues with it are strictly musical. I kind of get why it's
it's ass.
I kind of get why it's here in terms of thematically. Like, it's the whole record is kind of about every stage of processing and reacting against a shitty, hateful world, essentially. And a part of that process is often the moments where it's just too much to handle and you just completely sink into sheer despair. And I think that's what the song is going for. And I wish it were better musically, but I can understand what it's doing. And I don't think it's a complete refutation of everything that came before, as much as it is just an acknowledgement of sometimes you just feel that way, even if you're trying your best to not be that way. I would meet you
halfway if it was sequenced better. The fact that this is this is a
I was
testament
just about
as
to
to
bring
why
that
the
up.
sequence.
Yeah, that's fair.
If it wasn't the last song, I would totally meet you halfway here.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna stand firm in saying that I think this shit is fucking abhorrent.
That's fair. Hey, I can't blame you there. I definitely think it's one of the weakest songs on the album. I will say things that I do enjoy about the record, just to get them up front there. For starters, I say I really enjoy Will of the People, the song. I think it's ridiculous. I think the riff is really, really fun. I think it has the single funniest moment on this record, which I guess Jen and I are going to debate over this, since Jen's already listed their choice for that moment. But
it's kind of hard to beat.
But there's and I didn't even pick up on this until like the third or fourth time that I listened to the song, and I had to literally play it back to double check that I wasn't fucking hearing things. But there's a specific moment about halfway through the title track where like the will of the people is repeating over and over and over about 30 seconds, and one iteration, just one, people is changed to sheeple. and it's one like seriously one repetition of Will of the People is Will of the Sheeple, and you could literally miss it like I did the first few times I listened to it. But when I caught it, I had to double back and make sure my brain wasn't just making that up. No, it's seriously, I listened to it over and over to make sure it was there, and it is. All right. That is the funniest moment on this album.
If you are a rich musician and you have the audacity to call people sheeple when you've been making this neo-lib faux revolutionary dog shit for a decade.
Matt Bellamy is just like, he's pure libertarian. Like he's just a classical libertarian, basically, in every sense. And I don't have any fondness or real care for him as a human being. I just have fun listening to this fucking album. I think that You Make Me Feel Like It's Halloween is the most demented and stupid song this year, this side of Ghost's 20s.
Like, where does this come from? Like, did they just make this song separately and then just stick it here?
It is fucking hilarious, dude. And I absolutely get a goofy fucking grin on my face every single time it comes on. Those fucking chintzy ass, like, B-movie horror fucking Phantom of the Opera ripoff organ sounds, and then
it sounds like a Spirit Halloween theme song.
Don't listen to fucking visions of bodies being burned if you want spoopy music.
Yeah, but that is that's not even going for remotely the same vibe as what this song is going for. This song is just going for being stupid as hell, and it's fucking entertaining. All right, that's all I will say. And look, I made this comp in our group chat, and I think it automatically probably sent Jake on a depressive spiral. But I truly feel like this album, it has some level of kinship with Ghost's Impera. All right, and I know how that makes you feel, Jake. I will preface.
No, I just want to say I have never ever in my life felt more embarrassed for loving something now.
Look,
ever because you're not wrong, and it makes me want to set my vinyl of Meliora on fire.
Look, I'm not saying that I think this record is as good as Impera. I think Impera is light years better than this and more consistently holistic and well put together as a whole. But like it goes through the same kind of deliberately leaning into the goofiness as Impera does. And Halloween is its 20s essentially. And I feel the same way about this song as I do about 20s. And I don't even want to explain it because you can just go and listen to me talk about 20s. Killer Be Killed, I already said I love the song.
Parker.
Unironically, aside from all the goofiness and silliness, I think Verona is just genuinely one of the best deep cuts that Muse have ever recorded. The song is beautiful. It has a gorgeous guitar line. It has, look, I'm not going to take anything away from, I'm not going to be combative on this. Gorgeous guitar line, gorgeous vocal from Matt, very kind of longing and sappy, but also, you know what, so is Ghost. And I like it better when it's silly as opposed to when it's like, you know, I'm so lonely or whatever he's doing on that song. Euphoria is ridiculous as hell. I dig the shit out of its sheer ostentatiousness. And I've even come around a little bit on Compliance, which used to be like my absolute, well, no, it's not my least favorite on the record, but it used to be with a bullet. But I do appreciate the fact that that song does have, for as garish as its synths are, the synths and the vocals definitely still being the weakest part of it. I do really appreciate there's a level of like unnecessary sophistication in the bass part, and the rhythm section in general in that song is doing, I think, a lot of the legwork in a way that does, I think, give it a little bit more dynamics than maybe I initially thought it had. Liberation is like the most ostentatious, obvious Queen ripoff that this band have ever done. And it's like this band have done a lot of those, but nowhere have they kind of just leaned into it more than this. And to my chagrin, I kind of enjoy that. Won't Stand Down is the most like, I'm kind of glad they released this as the lead single because it's the most like just Frankenstein's monster ass song on this entire record. Just little bits of musical ideas just kind of stitched together in ways that make no sense. You transition from that legitimately heavy riff to that garish synth stuff, and it sounds legitimately like, what the fuck is happening? It's disorienting. I hate it. And I kind of enjoy those parts of it that are genuinely tough as nails, even though they kind of just completely veer off it. And I do think that one of the things that Matt has said, like, it's not an ambitious record, except in one extent, which is that their band are trying to be genuinely heavy at certain moments in ways they haven't been before. And I think they pull it off for the most part. I think like Killer Be Killed, I think is a genuinely gnarly song with a really great sounding metallic riff. I think the moments where they go for that heaviness more or less work. And yeah, this is just the whole week. Let me tell you something. This is the last thing I'll say, I promise. This whole week, once I first heard this and realized I didn't hate it, I was like, how can I defend this in a way where I get to maintain some level of integrity? And it was this awful situation mentally to go through of like, yeah, but da-da-da-da-da. And I just realized after a certain point, I need to not fucking care about trying to maintain integrity or anything like that, or trying to be like super self-conscious about my opinion. I just need to fucking own it. The same way as I did with the more garish moments on Impera or whatever. And or like the first couple of songs on that Panic at the Disco record that I still is a terrible album, but I still, to my chagrin, like those first couple of songs on it. And here it's just like, I don't know what's changed. I don't know what is happening to me more recently, but it's just been easier and easier for me to enjoy this kind of music. And I do genuinely think that this is the best album Muse have put out since The Second Law. I know that's like a hilarious sentence for anyone other than me to hear, but I do think this is rising to a certain standard in terms of commitment that Muse haven't held themselves to since that point. It is currently my fourth favorite Muse album, behind Black Holes and Revelation, which is still my number one, Second Law, which is my number two, and then Absolution, which is my number three. It's number four behind those. So yes, I think this is a better album than Origin of Symmetry and Showbiz, and you can suck my dick about it. Not you two. I know you two don't really care, but the people out there who might, whatever. This is the most I think I've enjoyed a Muse album since The Second Law. It's not perfect, even to the standards of a Muse album. Like it has moments that I think I would seriously encourage rethinking, even for what this is trying to be. Those being particularly Won't Stand Down and We Are Fucking Fucked. But on the whole, I've had fun with it. It's a stupid fucking brain dead album that is so much more tolerable than most of the stupid brain dead albums we've reviewed this year. And if my opinion doesn't make sense or is dissonant in some way, I'm sorry. And this is to our listeners, but I guess to everyone.
Look, we both had to work with, I think that's the common theme here between the two of us, is that we just had to stop doubting ourselves and own our fucking feelings instead of being trepidatious little fuck wagons about it.
I have no doubts or trepidations. I am happy to play double duty and rip into this thing's ass. As
You're
somebody
not burdened
who's been
like
passively,
we are. I envy you.
I do not share your burden. As somebody who's been passively listening to Muse singles on alt rock radio since 2016, they've been making the same goddamn "We Hate Them, Kill Them" song since 2009. And half of this album is no fucking different. It's when it diverges that it really starts to frustrate me. On songs like You Make Me Feel Like It's Halloween, which I swear to God sounds like it was made for a Ryan Murphy production that didn't finish.
I mean, like, Impera has a song on it that was released for the new Halloween movie, and it sounds more of a serious song than this does. How is that possible?
I cannot believe I listened to someone a week after a Panic at the Disco album came out drop a worse Queen ripoff than Brendan Urie in 2022 with Liberation. I listened to these Stranger Things ass synth tones and the Take On Me riff and We Are Fucking Fucked, which is what the 1975 sounds like to somebody that doesn't like the 1975, at least in terms of lyricism. I want to go out on a limb and make a comparison with this album to the 21 Pilots record Trench.
Okay, I'm with you.
I quite like that album.
Let me run with this. The lead idea, the thing that gripes with me the most is this a concept album or is it not? Fucking decide. And Trench has that same thing, but I like it, where it's like half a concept album, but in such a way where you can completely divorce yourself from all of their fucking vague ass young adult dystopian literature lore, and just get some good songs. But this is like, no, I have to play into this shit. I have to watch these fucking Blade Runner 2049 rip-off music videos to glean any idea of what they're trying to do with any of this shit, other than the same anonymous QAnon and 14-year-old leftist with bad taste can somehow both listen to this and enjoy it. Bullshit.
I will say,
oh god,
I think that I will take Muse's shitty, boring ass politics songs any day of the week over the politics songs of bands like 21 Pilots in the 1975, because to me, cheesy, chintzy, libertarian BS is infinitely more tolerable than cheesy, chintzy, faux leftist, liberalist bullshit any day of the week.
I will absolutely hand that to you. I probably agree.
And look, the one thing I'll say, and again, you don't have to agree with me here, is that in contrast to bands like 21 Pilots and the 1975 or whoever you want to, I never, ever get the sense that Matt Bellamy is posturing about anything that he sings about or believes. And I guess maybe it's just turning 25 and just being at this particular stage of my life where I'm particularly fatigued by the internet. It is always a good thing if you're giving off the vibe of not posturing. It's always going to stand you out, because it feels like basically every major culturally big artist at the moment is in some way posturing, and it's just driving me nuts. Anyway, that's kind of irrelevant.
I completely understand that, actually, and to a degree, I actually agree with you in that, like, I think we're two people who both really, hell, Jen, you too. I think we're people who are more than willing to engage with things that a lot of other people might call like overly earnest to a fault, maybe, like just with being too honest, being too straightforward, because it's like I find it refreshing in the landscape of modern art and music. I will agree though and say that my issues with this are that Jen sort of spoke to, like, my problem here is sort of the lack of commitment. And it's just like, if you're gonna do this, do more of it, because if you don't, then you're in a weird gray area that just makes me laser focus on all of the things about your music that I don't like and haven't liked for the past 10 years. So it's like, fucking pick one.
Yeah. All right.
Pick a side.
Right, I think we have exercised some much needed demons, and now we can move on and never talk about Muse again for the distant future, let's just say.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah indeed. Favorite tracks, least favorite tracks, ratings. I'll go first, just to reverse it up. My 3 favorite tracks on this album are Verona, Kill or Be Killed, and I will say, just to fully lean into it, You Make Me Feel Like It's Halloween. My least favorite song here is
fucking snicker makes me want to strangle you.
Hey, I'm into it. That's hot. Least favorite track here is We Are Fucking Fucked, and I am going to give Muse's Will of the People a 6 out of 10. Jen.
3 favorite tracks are Fuck You, and Euphoria. Least favorite track, here's the thing, I don't feel as strongly about this as I probably just made myself sound. I don't even know what
Hey, look, we all play it up for the content, so don't worry about it.
Probably
get that sweet ad revenue.
Gotta get that sweet ad revenue. My least favorite song is We Are Fucking Fucked. I give this 3 because I don't even have it in me to hate this much.
3.
Jake.
I am fucking fucked. 1.5.
All right, that gives us an average overall of 3.5 for Muse's Will of the People. Let us know at home what you think of either of the albums we've discussed today, Jid's The Forever Story and Muse's Will of the People. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Which side of the fence do you fall on with either of these records, really? Or is your opinion not been expressed here? Let us know in the comments below. We want to hear from you. We love your takes, and we hope you enjoyed these chaotic discussions today. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, you can head on over to the YouTube link in the description. Leave us a comment via that link. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving it a like. And of course, subscribing to the channel if you want to see more reviews from us. We put up 3 videos every week, and we promise they all have this level of wildness and energy. Just sometimes we're agreeing more often than disagreeing. But still, all the same, if you want to go above and beyond and support us even further, you can hit the join button on our YouTube page, and for just $1 a month, support us directly, become a member of the Jams and Tea family, get your name featured in the title call of every video on this channel. Plus, if you want to recommend us some music to listen to, your recommendation will go to the top of the pile. As always though, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Wheaties, breakfast of champions.